They want him to, because they've got deals with Netflix. And the controversial movie called Cuties. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, Cuties is a very layered movie, and I think people may be looking at it from a simplistic standpoint. I do agree that it has some sexual connotations, and yes, it does sexualize young women, and particularly young women of color. Two black girls, one African and one apparently African American or African European, whatever. But here's the take for me. This movie is not as simple as people think. I agree that it's very sexual. I agree that it does show almost a grooming process for young women who are innocent, who are very young. They're 11 years old, although they're pretending to be much older than that. But what it also manifests is a class of culture, a clash, C-L-A-S-H, of cultures, one from a traditional Muslim Islamic family and then into the Western secular, society with high change and strange mores and things. It also talks about immigration indirectly. It also talks about the role of women in terms of some of these societies and how role stereotyping is reinforced by the women within the community. And so what you see in this movie is a young woman who's African descent, who has immigrated and is still in a very strict environment, expected to, quote, be modest as a female should be in the context of the Islamic world, be covered, and to always be in deference to the males in the family. What happens to this young woman is she's socializing in a secular world that is far different than the world that, she has been brought up in or that her original parents came from. What I see is also a young preteen rebellion. She feels her mother's pain over the fact that the father has decided to take another wife. And although the mother is accepting of that, as in the culture, and as always, you are in deference to that, but she happens to be under the bed and hears her mother cry and lament about being replaced by another woman. And so this then strikes in her an animosity and anger toward her father, which creates this rebellious attitude that we see in many young people who will go out and do things out of anger and frustration and resentment that they may later regret. What I found also interesting in the movie is her need. She needed to be accepted. She felt displaced because what happens when people immigrate from a more traditional society to the secular West is that they often do feel out of place. And so part of what you're seeing is her need to identify and be accepted by others in her peer group who initially reject her, make fun of her, call her homeless because she, is probably an immigrant fleeing from some kind of, system in Africa. I don't know that. I'm just making that inference. And then you see her want to be able to be accepted. And to be accepted, she has to change the way she dresses. She has to change her behavior. But you also see creativity and leadership qualities in this young woman at the same time, because once she gets the grip of the things, we'll come back to the things and what they imply, but she didn't take charge.
Hang on a second, Dr. Newton. This is interesting because I didn't get that far in the movie. I watched it for a little bit, then it just turned me off totally. But I'm glad that you went through it and diagnosed what was going on and will share with the audience. 800-450-7876. Our guest is psychiatrist. We'll take your calls. But before we get to the African sacred science, Dr. Newton, we were talking about the Netflix, the controversial movie Netflix about Cuties. That's the title. I understand that a lot of people have dropped Netflix just because of this movie. But you were breaking it down for us. Do you think the average viewer, like myself, because I got turned off, would sit through and watch that whole movie about those young girls?
I don't think so. I think they would be turned off. But, of course, I'm always going to be looking at it from a behavioral standpoint and also from an artistic standpoint in terms of what the producers, directors, and writers were attempting to convey. And I saw many messages, some positive and some negative. What I did see, as I said, before we took a break, is the young lady did demonstrate some leadership skills. But at the end, and I'm going to come back in the middle, it still reflected her being a child. And when the movie ends, she's back to being 11 years of age, which gives us an impetus as that she didn't really understand what she was doing in terms of the behavior, what it meant sexually, and I also wonder what those people who were organizing those dance contests were thinking, because they all wanted young girls, they all wanted them to be seductive. So that for sure was promoting some kind of not only child pornography, but it may have encouraged some kind of level of pedophilia. But when we go into the mental aspect of the young lady herself, she was mirroring the behavior of the people in her present environment as she rebelled against the traditional ways of her African family. And so what we're seeing is a clash of culture, a clash of ideologies. We're seeing a promotion of sexuality as an escape mechanism, and in a child, in an 11-year-old who really had no experience with sexual behavior or anything of that nature. She was being, of course, socialized by her wayward girlfriends who are very much West and very much caught up into boys and sexual promiscuity and that kind of thing. But this young lady did not have that experience. So she was mirroring for acceptance because she felt that sense of rejection within her family.
Wow. You see, that's because you can analyze it as a psychiatrist, as you said, you can analyze that. But for us who were like, I was trying to watch it and I'm like,
I know. It can be, you see young black girls being, subjected to that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
But I think it's also an interesting movie to sit down with a young person and teach them. I realize that it probably will get a lot of bad PR and may need to be removed from Netflix and all of that. But it also is a teachable moment because our youth are being totally subjected to increased sexuality everywhere they turn. And people are not sitting down with young people and explaining, you see this, you see what this means, you see how they subtly seduce you, how you can be exploited, and all those kinds of things. I think that it has both the good aspects and bad aspects. I have to be very objective about these kinds of things, but I really do believe that it could be used as a teachable moment, regardless of, it is in many aspects vulgar, but in other aspects, it shows how easily influenced young people are, how the innocence can be robbed simply because of a need to want to be accepted and rejection of and feeling sorry for her mother, because she says in the movie, I pray that my father never comes back, because she heard her mother cry when the father was taking a second wife, which is, acceptable within Islamic culture. And so, and the aunt who was very traditional, felt like the young girl was losing it because she was becoming rebellious. But the West makes children rebellious. And so this is, to me, a clear indication of how our young people get led astray and influenced in very negative ways by Western society, who has, that can be amoral as well as immoral, and how young children who are innocent can be socialized. But at the end, she didn't go to the wedding because her mother allowed her not to go, and she went outside and started jumping rope. In other words, it ends with her going back to being 11 years of age with the innocence of an 11 year old. So I think that's an important lesson to go full circle. Yes, it has some vulgar aspects, and yes, it is sexually exploiting young women, and yes, it is sexualizing them and creating an environment where there may be pedophilia, enticing people to do things, but they already are doing things. And I think it's important as an instruction to show our children what could possibly happen and what we need to be watching and watchful for, and how we can educate them what the elements of sexual exploitation and pedophilia and human trafficking potentially could be. So I see it from both sides. That's my job, to see it and analyze it as objective as I can.
Right. That's why we got you. That's why we called you. But let me ask you this, though, in that vein, because there's sort of an undercurrent of pedophilia that's going around, and you probably tell us that it's been around forever, but it seems like now we're hearing more about pedophilia and pedophiles and Jeffrey Epstein and all that kind of stuff. It's in the news now. Do you think this particular Netflix movie came along at a different time, it wouldn't be quote unquote considered controversial?
I think it still might be considered controversial, because anytime you see children being sexualized, I think that sends up a red flag. And if you are a parent, that makes you very uncomfortable, regardless. But I think there is a heightened sensitivity and awareness about pedophilia and sexual trafficking of young people. But what's interesting is there may be a heightened awareness, but there's also some ignorance, because people don't think it can happen in their backyard, and it's everywhere, and it's very powerful people with money that run these rings of pedophilia across the globe, and they have a system that operates almost like a mafia. And because they're powerful, and because they have money, and because they pay, officials off, they're able to get away with things that normally other folk would go to jail for. So I think it is highly sensitized now, but I think we can't put our heads in the sand either and ignore it, because this is a real serious problem. And having this young, innocent girl be turned out and not really understand what is happening to her is, to me, a good message and a good lesson. It's a teachable moment, so that people can understand. You're looking at through the lens of a child who doesn't really get what it means to take a photograph of her private parts and put that on the internet and what that means. You know what I'm saying? So, but you're socialized into that, because this culture, the Western culture, is a demoralizing, amoral, immoral type culture of which children are abused and sexualized every day. And children of color and black children are more likely to be trafficked than other folks' children, black and Latinx children. And you know why? Because what happens is that they're less likely to be investigated. Their absence, their death, their trafficking is less likely to be investigated than it will be for a white child.
All right, let me ask you this then. Do you think if the movie was about boys, you'd have been different? All the controversy would have been different?
I'm not sure, because boys are also being subjected to these same kinds of things. I'm not sure. It depends on the audience and depends on their frame of reference. I think there would have been less anger about it. They would have said, oh, this is a shame, blah, 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 blah. I think seeing young girls, put in those kind of compromising positions and using their sexuality to try to get over is offensive. It's offensive for any child to me, but for some people it's more offensive for girls than it is for boys. But I think that makes also boys extremely vulnerable, and because we will tend to be more protective of our girls, and our young boys are being molested and sexualized at early ages as well before they're mature enough to understand what is going on. So we have a
Right.
problem of children being, early sexualized in the Western world.
Right, because I was going to say that it seems like a double standard. If it's the young boys who are being sexualized or being taken advantage of, they'll say, "Oh, had a boy," they're breaking them. You've even got some parents who would, get young women for their young boys, they're claiming they want to make sure that they're straight. But what happens on the other side, it's much more. It seems much more problematic. Explain.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a cultural, like you say, a double standard. It's a cultural double standard. None of our children should be sexually exploited. And we need to protect our boys as well as our girls. And we need to teach both sexes how the subtleties are under which they can be, exploited. In this particular case, this child wanted to be accepted somewhere. She didn't fit in, which is the way a lot of people feel when they immigrate. Is they don't identify with their original culture, and they don't fit in this Western culture. So they're just kind of lost. And so what you're doing is dealing with the psychology of a young woman who's seeking acceptance and who is rebelling against the cultural dynamic that allows her father to take on another wife other than her mother. So yeah, I mean it's very layered. It's very, very layered.
Is it a cultural difference though? That you mentioned that they're Islamic family that's involved,
Right?
but that's not indicative of all Islamic families.
Well, in traditional Islam, women are supposed to maintain their piety. They're supposed to maintain their covered body. They are supposed to be, respectful and obedient to the men in their lives, and to have more than one wife is not frowned upon, because depending on your income, up to 4 wives is permitted within the confines of the religion. And so when you move from those cultures where it's socially acceptable, and it brings me to the point that I want to make, is that people are talking about, these marriages that have more than one wife and all of that. Having treated people who come out of those dynamics, they're not all hunky-dory like people think. Oh, they got more than one wife, and look at how they get along. No, they don't always get along. There's a lot of infighting, a lot of competition, and all of that. So it is not now in modern times. The more educated women do not usually adhere to that. They usually have one husband and one wife, and because economically, to have more than one wife, you're going to have some money. But
Right.
but in
Hold that thought right there. I'll let you finish that thought on the other side. We got to take a short break. We're closing in on the top of the hour. So thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is psychiatrist Dr. Patricia Newton. We got a space on her couch for you, or you can just call us up at 800-450-7876. We're going to discuss African sacred science, but right now we're closing out discussing the controversial movie that's on Netflix. It's called Cuties. A lot of people have canceled their subscription because of this. So, Dr. Newton, I'm going to let you finish your thought. And what's her name? Karen in PG County wants to find out if they should pull the movie then, for what you said.
If they should
After you finish your on that, pull it. If they should drop it, Netflix.
Well, I can't tell people what to do. People have their own value systems. If it morally offends you, then of course drop it. If you want to look at it from a more analytical way, then I would not drop it. But it's what people want to do. I mean, I cannot infuse any of analysis that I make on what people's moral judgments are. I think people should follow their conscience, and whatever their conscience dictates for them, that's what they should do. As I said, it has some bad elements that are offensive, but it also has some instructive elements. So you've got two sides, and I would be remiss if I said do this way or that way. I cannot address where people's moral compass is, and how they would utilize a movie of this type.